Well, hello, welcome back to Intermediate Writing with Professor Kent Lee here. Today we're going to talk again about paraphrasing and summarizing, and I'm going to go through some exercises in the book. The first one was not assigned to you. I decided not to assign it to you because you had a lot of other assignments. And secondly, I kind of want to maybe work on the material before I make students do it, so maybe next year. I felt like the examples were not quite complete, but I'll talk about them because they're good examples of paraphrasing and summarizing in source use anyway. So to review, paraphrasing and summarizing are kind of similar. When you reword something, you shorten it. And usually when you cite information or ideas from a source, you shorten it or summarize it as much as possible, and of course in doing so you naturally change the wording. You paraphrase as you summarize. And if you're just paraphrasing, you naturally leave out some things, and so you kind of summarize as you paraphrase. So they kind of go together. They're almost two sides of the same coin, as we say. So I will maybe use the terms kind of interchangeably, because they really overlap a lot. So again, what do you do when you summarize and paraphrase information from a source? You shorten it a lot. You really just focus on the most important information, the key ideas from that source for your own essay, because in your own essay, you're trying to make some points of your own. You're trying to, argue for your ideas, your interpretation, your analysis, your opinions or something like that. Even if it's more scientific, you're arguing that, this experiment was cool and I found something useful here. And of course you cite sources in order to justify your claim. The sources you cite may be, to provide further evidence for your arguments, to provide examples, or to provide a contrast. And those writers, those scholars advocate that, but I disagree. So I cite them so that I can disagree with them, or I cite them so I can point out problems with their analysis or their research or their ideas. And so we cite sources. So you focus first on changing content words. Those are nouns, verbs, adjectives, main verbs, adjectives. So you change those when possible. You can't change certain technical terms, of course. But you change those as much as possible with synonyms, and you combine sentences. You reduce things by combining sentences as much as possible when you're trying to use information that's maybe spread through several sentences in the original. When possible, you condense it down, to maybe half a sentence. A sentence, you might condense one paragraph down to a sentence or two sentences. Depends a lot really on the kind of writing that you're doing. So let's look at examples. So again, we're going to look at two exercises. The first one I did not assign to you, and the second one I did assign to you, the one on summarizing and plagiarism. So the first one is section 4.3 of my book. It's called paragraph exercise number 2, or paraphrasing exercise number 2, and I didn't assign number 1 because we didn't really have time. And it's on page 72. So what we have here, I've got passages or excerpts from an original text that I found online. It's an article. It's kind of a fairly professional source. It's the website of a speech language hearing association. Sounds like a fairly professional organization. Now, this article has no authors listed. Either it's written by one person who is simply paid to be an anonymous writer, or very likely it's written by 2 or more people, maybe including the editor, and it has no author. So when you cite sources, we talked about the footnote citation system, and we're going to see examples later where a different kind of system where you actually cite the name of the author in parentheses and the year in the text. So when you have no author, it's anonymous. What you do in many citation systems is you shorten the title put that in quotes, and that's how you cite it. In this case, it's in parentheses in the text, or if it's a footnote, a shortened title in your footnote, just a shortened title, an abbreviated title. In this citation system, I think this was MLA. This is an example of MLA, which is more often used in literature and a few related fields. So in MLA, you don't really, for the in-text citation, so that's when you have like a citation within the text, like in parentheses. That's an in-text citation. In a lot of systems, you have author year, and we'll see an example later of that. It's different from the footnote citation. In in-text citation, it's actually in the text. It's in the sentences of your text. Parentheses, author, year. If you don't have an author, then the abbreviated title, usually in quotation marks, so title. Now in this one, this is MLA, and since MLA is used in literature, the year something is published is less important, because in literature you might be, if this is maybe for a literature and language education course, and the student is writing this, and maybe they're using, maybe the professor wants MLA for some such reason. The MLA system doesn't care so much about years, at least for the in-text citations, because in literature and some related fields, years are less important. Let's say if you're taking a literature class and you're writing an essay and you're citing sources, the sources you cite might be some dead writer from 100 years ago, 10 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. Or it could be a scholar who's commenting on literature, who's doing research or has done research on a particular writer. A literary scholar, again, who might have written something last year, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. It's less important. So the in-text citation, you don't have years. Now at the end references or works cited, sure, you'll have all that information. So here in the MLA, you would either put the author name in quote in the parentheses, so singular parenthesis, plural parentheses, that it's a Greek plural pattern, is goes to es. You put just the author. If you don't have an author, the shortened title of the article. So here it's just late blooming in parentheses and quotation marks. So you see the original number 1, so that's one passage from an article on their website. And then we have cited examples as it might be cited by, say, a student citing this as a source. So let's go through these. So original number 1, and then cited example set 1 based on like the first half of the passage that you see in the book. Number 1 is children develop language skills. They go through the same stages, but they may reach the stages at different ages. Citation, late blooming, the title of the article. This one is probably the better one in this set. It's not entirely clear. It says they usually go through the same stages, and actually the truth is they pretty much always or almost always go through the same stages. So it's a fairly accurate paraphrase, and it's got the proper citation form, a proper MLA citation. Number 2, example 2, it's kind of paraphrased in an unclear way. They go through each stage at some point. It's really not clear because it's not entirely accurate paraphrase, because the truth is they pretty much almost always go through the same stages in the same sequence, just maybe at slightly different ages. And there's no citation. So no citation is one grounds for calling this plagiarism. It would be plagiarism if it's like a copy and paste job. They copied and pasted the text without paraphrasing, summarizing. It's plagiarism if they don't cite the source. So when do you cite the source? Come back to that in a few minutes. When do you have to cite a source? Number 3, it's kind of an awkward rewording. I like passive voice, passive verbs like are passed through, but in this case it doesn't make sense. the stages that are passed through by children. It's an awkward passive voice. It's an awkward rewording. Overall, the rewording is not very clear. There is a citation. Okay, that's nice. And also the wording, the rest of the wording is too similar to the original. It's kind of a, they copied and pasted and they changed basically an active verb to an awkward passive. And that was it. Not much rewording. It's kind of plagiarism because it's too similar to the original. Now, is there some golden standard? Like it has to be at least 87% different, 63.5%. There's no like exact standard. It really depends on the kind of writing, the kind of source that you're citing and using, and then the kind of writing that you're doing. It really depends, and you can't say, oh, it has to be 63.5% different. It depends. But in this case, it's this clearly lazy. This is kind of a very lazy, minimal paraphrasing, and it's still too similar. Number 4, there's a citation. That's nice, and they've tried to paraphrase it. It's a little unclear. It's not exactly an accurate paraphrase. There can be variation in the stages they go through. That's not exactly accurate. When it says there can be variation in the stages they go through, not entirely accurate, because really the original article says they don't change the stages in the sequence of the stages in language development is pretty much the same. What differs is the ages, or when they do this. So it's not exactly an accurate paraphrase. And so you must be careful, of course, when you cite sources, use sources, that your paraphrase is accurate, that your information is accurate, that you've accurately read and understood the source. The next set of examples is from the second part of the passage. Number 5 is good. It's an appropriate paraphrase, a summary, and it's got the proper citation format. It's good. Number 6, also good. Again, it's an appropriate paraphrase, I think, and it's got a proper citation. Both have kind of changed the order of things. In paraphrasing, they've kind of moved things around and changed the sentence structure. And it looks like a good paraphrase. They've changed enough of the wording. I think it looks good. Number 7 is it's a good paraphrase, but there's no citation. That's bad. And number 8, it's got an appropriate citation. It's an okay paraphrase, but it's not entirely clear. The last part, if they receive a response, on page 72, by the way, I should say that's page 72. If they receive a response, what a response? It's not logically consistent. You're talking about children in general, and they say something and do adults respond to them. So they receive a response. It's not entirely clear, a response, because you're talking about general anytime and anywhere, like if they receive appropriate responses or if adults respond to them. So it's not a very clear paraphrase. The next one, you have another section from the original article here and some cited examples now on page 73. Let's see. 2.1, you've got an appropriate citation, but the information is just wrong. It's an inaccurate paraphrase. That's not what the original says. It does not say, okay, yeah, they do prevent children from learning, okay, but they are not evidence of low intelligence. The article doesn't say that. There are some language disorders that have nothing to do with intelligence or don't correlate with intelligence. Some do, some don't. So 1 is wrong. It's got a citation, but it's a wrong paraphrase. It's inaccurate. Number 2, the first sentence in number 2, it's a nice paraphrase, but the second sentence is not accurate. exactly. Difficulty reading and writing can lead to problems with thinking and learning. That's not an accurate statement, and it's not what the original says. It's actually the reverse. Thinking problem, like mental impairments, learning impairments, disorders, would lead to difficulties with reading and writing. And it's the opposite. It's not that difficulty with reading and writing leads to learning and thinking problems. That doesn't make sense. It's like cognitive and learning impairments that lead to reading and writing difficulties. And there's no citation. Number 3, it's a copy and paste job. I mean, there's a citation, speech and language disorders, but it's a copy and paste job. Not much has changed. It's plagiarism. 2.4, here we have a good paraphrase. It's a very nice paraphrase. It's a good summary. It summarizes really all the important points of the original paragraph. It shortens everything down to one nice short sentence, really nice. And it's got a citation. Now, there's a little typographical problem with the citation, speech and language disorders. You just need to capitalize the first word of a shortened title in a citation when you're citing the title. So speech and language disorders, it's not necessary to capitalize everything here. Okay. Now, so when to cite? When do you cite a source? Not everything, like if you say the sky is blue, you don't need to cite that, of course. It depends, really. What is likely new information to the reader or to a majority of the readers? It really depends. It depends on your audience. If you're writing a college paper, there are some things you're going to cite which you might not cite if you're writing a PhD dissertation, of course, because your potential readers are different. And some information, if it's new to you, it's probably new to your audience, to your potential readers. So that's maybe one kind of metric or standard or criterion. Is this information new to you? And is it likely new to the potential reader? Not just your professor who's grading it, but imagine your classmates are reading this too, or your peers, your fellow classmates. Is it likely new to them? Is it new information or new ideas, new data? Especially data, of course, data. Not everyone goes around memorizing data and statistics and such. So informativeness is kind of a basic linguistic principle. It's one of these unwritten rules of communication that underlies human communication. Informativeness. Is this information new or informative? Or are these ideas new or informative? And is this information or this idea the unique intellectual property of a scholar, a researcher, a scientist? Is it that person's new idea, original idea, that is not known to, probably unknown to all of your readers? And if you're not sure, it's probably safer to cite it anyway. There are some examples here in these passages which I've just walked you through, which to me would not be informative. But if you're writing this and this is kind of new to you and it's new to your readers likely, then it's maybe safer to cite that. So informativeness is one criterion. The other is kind of intellectual property. Is it intellectual property of somebody, some researcher or scholar, that is not commonly known to your audience? Again, informative kind of defines intellectual property. A scholar's unique ideas, but if it's commonly known to your likely readers, then you may not need to cite it. A certain theory that's really famous in the field and you've learned it in your class and pretty much is something that people in your class, in your major department should know and would know. That kind of theory may not need to cite, but it's always safer to if you're not sure. But certainly unique information, ideas that are more unique, arguments than somebody else has presented, which seem new and novel to you and maybe are novel to your readers, you should cite that because If you don't, you're kind of pretending like it's your own ideas, and it's not. It's somebody else's ideas, someone else's information. So you would also, not want to look like you're pretending that this is your unique information, your unique ideas. So let's go on to the next one, section 4.4. It's on page 74, called Paraphrasing and Sources, and I had you do this for an exercise in the Google form. So we have an original article about climate change, and so in A you have one paragraph from the original text, the original source, and then it's followed by a sample paraphrase. So the sample paraphrase, here we're using Chicago parenthetical style. So in the previous exercise, it's MLA parenthetical style, where you have parentheses to cite your source in the text. Here we're using Chicago. So before your midterm, I walked you through the Chicago footnote style. And this is confusing. Chicago is really complicated because now there's this other Chicago style. It's the Chicago in-text parenthetical style with parentheses, where you have author, year in parentheses. Or if you mention the author in the sentence, like here it's Klein is the writer. So if you mention Klein, like Klein said this in your sentence, then it's Klein, parentheses, year. Or if you don't mention the author's name in the sentence directly, it's, as we say, it's not part of the sentence grammar, then the author and year are in parentheses, Klein, 2014. And you can tell it's Chicago because there's no comma. You may have heard of something called APA style, which is used in psychology and education and various social sciences, many fields of linguistics. In APA, this would be Klein, comma, 2014. And you'll see, when you look at the in references or works cited, they will, of course, all look very different between MLA, APA, and Chicago. They will all be different. Text citations, the in-text or parenthetical citation for Chicago, the Chicago in-text style with parentheses, it's author, no comma, and year. And in the Chicago style, you can also put author, year, comma, page numbers if information is from a particular page. Okay, so B, I should have maybe numbered these instead. It's kind of confusing, sorry. I was in a real bit of a rush when I was kind of adapting some of my older materials over the winter break. B is a good, appropriate paraphrase and summary. It's much shorter than the original, and just the key points are kind of presented here. Not everything. You don't try to paraphrase and summarize everything, just the points that are relevant, important for your own essay, your own research paper, your own writing, just the stuff you need. So it's a nice, short summary, and it's got an appropriate citation. Now you could put it at the beginning, Klein says blah, 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 or you can put it at the end, like, as long as it's clear that this citation is referring to like the sentence or the two sentences before it, as long as it's clear. It doesn't matter if you say Klein's 2014 says blah, 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 or blah, 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 Klein 2014. If you have the author in the sentence or the author in parentheses, if it's before or after, as long as it's clear to the typical reader that this information or these ideas are from Klein, the writer. Okay, C, we have another original section from the original article, D. So D is another attempt to paraphrase this and use this. Well, D has a citation, Klein, 2014, argues that, but it's pretty similar to the original. It's kind of a very lazy paraphrase. Yeah, a lot of words are pretty much the same. Very minimal rewording, if any. So D, even though it cites the source, it's kind of plagiarism because it's a copy and paste job with minimal rewording. A quotation, client argues that, blah, why is this quoted? Why is this a direct quote? This is a useless, lazy quotation. Don't do this. Occasionally quotations are fine, especially more so in humanities writing, but in this case it's not necessary. There's no reason to quote the exact words here. Quotations are usually if there's something important or unique or really cool about the exact words that somebody wrote or said. In this case, the exact wording is not important. In fact, it would be better just to summarize this to something shorter without a direct quote. This is a useless direct quotation. Yes, there is a citation, Klein 2014, but it's a direct quote that's not necessary except to fill up space to meet a word limit, which is lazy. This is lazy. Don't do like this. If you do direct quotes, make sure it has a purpose, and when you directly quote something, explain what it means. Maybe it says, client says, quote, ... Then comment on that quotation. Say something about it. Again, this would be more often done in, say, history, philosophy, literature analysis courses, where there is something important about what a writer said and the way they said it, where you have a quote, you quote an exact quote, and then you explain what that means, or you interpret it, or you comment on it. And if you don't, it's just a lazy space-filling quotation, which you should not do. In this case, there is no reason for a direct quotation. This should be summarized instead. F, there's a citation, but it's a lazy copy and paste job, a little bit of paraphrasing, but it still looks pretty similar to the original, and it's lazy. It's kind of plagiarism. G, good paraphrase, citation. So notice again the citation is at the beginning here, and some examples of the citation was toward the end of the section that was cited. And it's a pretty decent paraphrase. Here we have a longer original, so H presents kind of a longer section from the original text. I don't know why I put quotation marks here. I is another paraphrase example by a hypothetical student. Citation at the beginning, Klein 2014 claims that blah blah blah. Very nice paraphrase. It uses the information from Klein as a starting point, and then the writer goes on further to develop his or her ideas based on that. Takes the ideas from Klein and the writer then elaborates on those ideas, develops them in his or her own way. And that is smart use of source material. It's properly cited, it's paraphrased very nicely, a very nice short summary, and then the writer goes on to develop his or her own thoughts based on this, starting from like line 5 here on page 76. The difficult aspect is however, this need not be blah blah blah. If we take a balanced approach, So here the writer is developing his or her own ideas based on a source citation in the first part of this paragraph. That's how you use sources intelligently. You cite information or ideas from a source, and then you analyze it, interpret it, comment on it, develop it further in your own way, in your own direction, in your own words, or in maybe some other cases you might criticize it if it's something you disagree with. And here, of course, Klein is making a really good point about neoliberalism and climate change, and the writer goes on to develop it in what could be a very interesting way, taking this idea from Klein and developing it further in his or her own creative, unique, intelligent way. That's how you use sources. That's why we use sources, to say something interesting, develop your own ideas, your own opinions, your own analyses, your own interpretation, your own informative or persuasive essay in your own words. That's why we use sources. So that's a little survey of paraphrasing, summarizing, and using sources. So I hope you find some good sources for your final paper. You should be looking now for sources for your final paper and for some of the related assignments you've got based on that. So I hope this helps. We've hopefully learned something about paraphrasing and summarizing and source use, and we've seen a couple of different citation systems that we haven't really talked much about before. And toward the end of the semester, I will actually do a whole video on the Chicago in-text parenthetical style. And yes, Chicago is confusing because there's so many different variations or versions of Chicago style. I hope you don't get confused. For me, teaching Chicago style, it's kind of confusing or maddening, partly because I'm just not used to it. It's not what I use, but it's just complicated because there are so many different versions of it. But for your final paper, use whatever system you like. You can use Chicago footnote style. You can use the Chicago in-text parenthetical style. You can use MLA. You can use APA. If you're used to some other system from a different field, use that too. I'm used to all kinds of different systems, at least reading them. As I've read professors' papers from linguistics and engineering and health research and all kinds of stuff. Throw anything at me you want, as long as it's a valid citation system and a valid use of sources. Give it to me. Looking forward to reading your final papers. Next lecture, I'll get more into some text features of different styles of writing and different types of sources. All right, see you soon. Goodbye.